My name is Bond. James Bond. My instructions were implicit. I was to leave for Jamaica in 2 hours. License to kill.
Now you maybe miss it.
You don't miss a thing.
I decided to accept your invitation.
I have to leave immediately.
Just as things were getting interesting again.
James Bond, 007. License to kill whom he pleases, where he pleases, when he pleases. From the elegant clubrooms of Mayfair to exotic island night spots.
Good evening. Who pays you?
You?
Fellas?
A strange adventure of intrigue, treachery, and love.
Hello? Oh, Mr. Bond. I was thinking, why don't you collect me at my apartment? It's lovely up here in the mountains.
Her directions were easy to follow. And she sent a few of her friends to make sure I didn't get lost. She thought I was dead, but I proceeded to prove her wrong. I thought it was always polite to knock first, before shooting. Honey, from our very first meeting, was everything her name implied. She clung to me like a wet bathing suit. But business as usual came first. The pace was killing.
I thought you less stupid. I could have had you killed in the swamp.
And why didn't you?
You damaged my organization. Unfortunately, I misjudged you. You are just a stupid policeman whose luck is run out.
Maybe it was my luck. Up to my neck in hot water. Or something blowing up in my face.
You will live dangerously with the superbly resourceful James Bond. The exclusive screen dramatization of the book that has entertained millions of viewers. The exotic and tantalizing Dr. No.
Some people will go to any extremes for a little privacy.
Welcome to the Tailoring Talk Show with me, your host, Roberto Revilla. I'm a bespoke tailor, menswear designer and owner of Roberto Revilla London suit and shirt makers. This is the podcast where you drop in for the threads, but often leave with something quite unexpected. If you haven't already, please support the show by subscribing, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please help us out by leaving a rating and a review. We are celebrating episode 30 by kicking off the massive Tailoring Talk James Bondathon, where we follow the James Bond series in order, ticking off each movie as each month goes by. My guest and I will be deep diving into each film, covering everything from our overall review and digging into the clothes, the gadgets, the cast, our favourite moments from each instalment, and much, much more. Of course, that means we kick things off with 1962's Dr. No. And I'm joined by Philip, I was going to say Phil, to talk about the very first entry in the 007 saga. Philip, how are you this evening, and are you as excited as me to be watching, and in many cases revisiting, these classic spy movies?
It's been fantastic to actually get back into it because I saw it a little while ago, and I just flipped over it because it was the first time I'd seen it, and I had no idea that the film was as good as it was, and it really has stood the test of time, which is why I really enjoyed it, and I just flipped over it, and then I wanted to see the rest of them afterwards.
Yeah, so I saw Dr. No for the first time yesterday, so we're recording on the 17th of January, so I saw it yesterday, Sunday, and I have to say I really enjoyed it.
You'd not seen it before?
I'd never seen it, so I'd seen different scenes, so I remembered, obviously the Ursula Andress coming out of the water scene is one of the most famous moments in movie history, definitely up in the top 20. I'd definitely seen the scene with the tarantula, but, just kind of bits when it's been on TV, or, I don't even consciously remember. I mean, I've never sat through that film from start to finish, that's for sure, because the beginning was quite a surprise and the end was, very new to me. So I had no idea what was going to happen in it. But yeah, I actually really, really enjoyed it. So I downloaded it on Apple TV. So I had it in full, it's a full 4K restoration with Dolby Atmos and so on. And definitely the way to enjoy it. It looked absolutely stunning, because if you watch the original trailers, you can see where the print has aged, and there's all the crackling on the screen that you get, and the kind of dark spots and so on. And for these movies, they've been through a very, very painful restoration process. So they took the original negatives and they fed them very carefully in this specialist scanning machine, and then once everything was sort of scanned in, they then had, I guess, digital artists kind of working on every single frame of the film, painstakingly color correcting, taking out all of the the kind of aging and the breaks in the film in the negatives, and joining things together.
See, I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that at all. I much prefer seeing it in its original format, because what I'm seeing it as I saw it as people would have seen it in the 60s. Some of that aging, some of it probably wasn't even aging. It was probably how it was made because of the imperfections that were in the film in terms of that, 8mm film that was used. And so that was going to make it... so when you watch it now, if you watch it on the format that you're talking about, you could then compare it with other films that are out now, but seeing it in that original format allows me to kind of go back to a place that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that was another reason why I liked it.
Problem for me is I've got an Ultra HD curved television and I like to enjoy that thing to its fullest. So I was really, really pleased with the restoration.
Yeah.
Because I just like things that look visually stunning. And it did look so good. It really did. I know exactly what you mean. There is that sort of charm and nostalgia about the original print. I mean, the trailer, which I played at the intro, the opening to this episode, when you watch that back, I mean, that thing looks like someone pulled it out of the bottom of a garbage can and then ran it through a projector. It's aged so badly.
No, not at all.
Yeah, it
does.
No,
not at all. No, not at all. It actually, they made the trailers completely differently to how they make trailers now. I mean, now you almost get a gist of what the entire film's going to be before you even see it in the cinema. They were able to...
That basically was the whole film.
It was arty.
That was the whole film in 2.5 minutes.
But it was still very arty, rather than sort of, putting it right in your face.
Yeah.
But then that was the nature of what the film was all about, in the sense that they didn't know what they were doing. In fact, Dr. No is actually the 6th incarnation of the series. They were actually going to make Thunderball first, but they actually made this one because it was just going to be easier for them to make. And they actually had something where they didn't know what the format was going to be, but they did what was very similar at the time. So there's other movies of the time, films like Barbarella, where they've got a similar opening with the very colourful sort of visuals that you see at the very beginning. But in this first one, you've got groups of different people partying, whereas following... future James Bond films just has the woman, silhouetted in various different colours and with the visuals and stuff like that. Whereas this one, just has just the visuals with just random people partying, has the great iconic music, and it's got that grainy sort of sound which I like listening to. It took me back. I really enjoyed it.
We'll talk about the intro shortly. Let's just skip back a bit. Because before we begin, I think we've really got to say a few words about the man who's responsible for all of this, Mr. Ian Fleming himself. He was born at the turn of the last century, which sounds really weird to say, but he was born in 1908. Clever fellow who was educated at Eton and then educated abroad in both Germany and Austria. And his early career began at Reuters, the news agency, and he then went on from there to become a stockbroker. During the Second World War, he was the assistant to the director of naval intelligence at the Admiralty in London. And it was there at the Admiralty that he basically gained all the experience and met all the people that would provide the sort of backdrop and inspiration for all the characters and incidents that we would then go on to read about and see on screen. After the war, he then became a foreign manager for Kemsley newspapers, and then in 1952, at the age of 43, which is a touch younger than you and me, he wrote the very, very first James Bond adventure entitled Casino Royale at his house in Jamaica, and it took him just 2 months. And after that, he'd then go on to write another 13 James Bond novels. Obviously, we know that there were more because then other authors took up the mantle after he passed away. You know, fortunately, he did survive to see the success of James Bond, or at least the initial success, and he got to see his character portrayed on the big screen by Sean Connery in Dr. No and From Russia with Love. He also, outside of Bond, wrote a short story for his only son, Casper, while he was recovering from a heart attack in 1962. I mean, I think he had multiple heart attacks, which, I don't know if that was down to his lifestyle, smoking or whatever, but quite strange for someone who was relatively young. But his only son, Casper, he wrote this little short story about a flying car, which we now know as Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And then he died, sadly, 2 years later in 1964 at the age of just 56. But his legacy will live forever. It's amazing to think of what he achieved and the rich life that he lived in such a relatively short space of time. And you can really, really see a lot of his experience and, the richness of that life. It just comes through in his writing and the fantastic visuals that he creates in his books. Did you read any of the original Fleming novels at all?
I haven't read any of the Fleming novels. I mean, as I say, for me, James Bond has been a much more recent sort of phenomenon. I started watching the James Bond films only when I was in my sort of late teens, when Pierce Brosnan was doing them. So that's when I was watching them in the cinema because I had that kind of time on my hands. But I didn't really actually start to watch the original ones until very recently. And it's a far cry from, how we live today and the way films are made and how TV shows are put on screen and how people are seen on television and on film. And I really wanted to hark back to a period where people were free to kind of express themselves in a way that actually they didn't care so much about certain consequences. It was about making what was a spectacular picture and, who cares about the consequences? Yeah. And that's what I like.
I own Casino Royale. I bought that when Daniel Craig's Casino Royale came out. But I hadn't actually read any of Fleming's other novels. I did read, when I was in my late teens, I think the author was Sebastian Faulks, but I'll need to look that up. But he kind of continued writing Bond novels long after Fleming had died. And I remember one was called License Revoked, which, is kind of the license to kill kind of theme where he gets his license taken away. And another one, I think it was called Icebreaker. And I don't remember much about the stories themselves because, it was a good 20, 25 years ago. But the one thing I do remember is that his writing style very much carried on in the way that Fleming would write. Because one thing Fleming is famously quoted as saying that there is only one recipe for a bestseller: you have to get the reader to turn the page. In the same way that Bond as a character is very sort of hard and very economical and ruthless, Fleming's writing style was quite like that as well. It was very short sentences that would just move you from one beat to the next, from one set piece to the next, and it would really carry you through. His writing style really carries you through the book, almost like you're on a roller coaster. And it is literally, they're page turners. You cannot put them down. You can't, very often we'll read books and we'll be like, I'll just get to the end of the next chapter and then I'll call it a night. His writing style compels you to just try and read all the way through in one sitting. And it's no wonder that obviously they saw the opportunity to turn these wonderful books into films. I do want to go back and actually read them now that we're watching all the films as well. But yeah, I mean, as someone who loved creative writing when I was a kid, this sort of thing is right up my street. The movie kicks off, and it was kind of quite jarring for me because, again, like you, Pierce Brosnan was really my Bond. I mean, you could argue Roger Moore was my Bond because that was the one that my parents would always put on for me or sit me in front of when I was a very small child. But I think when you're a small child with Bond, it was always something that was just on in the background, or something that you were kind of really only interested in the set pieces, the action, the gadgets. That was about it, right? And maybe if we were lucky, Dad would buy us one of the cars or something like that. But you didn't really know exactly what was going on with them. You just knew that there was this guy who would always get girls, and he got these really cool gadgets and these cool cars, and then he would have to go and defeat bad people. And it was when GoldenEye came out that really got me. The whole I just loved that film. And obviously there was the game as well at the same time, the N64 game, which was one of the best games ever made. And so therefore I'm used to all of the cold opens that they do for the Bond films with the massive action set pieces before the credits kick in. So I don't know how you felt, but this was quite jarring for me because it was literally just straight in on the credits. I
mean, for me, because I didn't really have... I mean, obviously, I had seen many of the later James Bond films, but I just thought to myself, well, this is the first one. So, let's just sort of put everything that I know about it aside and just see what they did. And I personally really like the opening because it kicks off in a casino, which is where I really like to be. So, yeah. I mean, and the other thing is, casinos nowadays, if you've not been to one recently, everyone tends to sort of dress in, sweatpants, or they're in T-shirts. You're not allowed to wear shorts, thankfully. You can't go in football tops or anything like that. But very rarely will you ever see anyone wearing a suit. And if you sit down at a poker table or a blackjack table or a baccarat table, I mean, not that there's any baccarat tables at any casinos I've been to, but if you sit down at any place and you're wearing a suit, you will look out of place. You will look completely like you shouldn't be there. Or if you sit down at a poker table playing in a suit, you'll look like a noob because you look like you're in fancy dress, and everyone will just draw their attention to you and they'll try and play against you. Whereas in that film, that was the standard dress if you were going to a casino, otherwise they wouldn't let you in. And that's kind of what I want to hark back to.
Yeah, me too. I'm totally with you on that. It's got nothing to do with my job. The one thing, because I was watching this with Carolina and she'd never ever seen it before either. And sort of halfway through the opening credit sequence, then the Three Blind Mice come on. And they play, that sort of Caribbean sort of style sort of tune. And we both looked at each other. It was like, what? This is just weird. And then we were just like, okay. Carolina was like, what were whoever put these title credits together, what were they smoking? Please find out.
Yeah. But no, the other significant thing about the casino was that it was 62 and there was no thought to the fact that there was a woman by herself parting with several thousands of pounds on a baccarat game. There wasn't anyone with her. It was her own money, and she was there to have a good time. And she happened to meet by herself. She was independent. She liked the look of James Bond. She accosted him afterwards, even though she'd lost loads of money to him. And later on that day, she's playing golf, in his shirt, in his apartment. What a legend! Yeah. Both of them. I mean, both of them were legends for that.
So I'm going to give a little synopsis. So, arriving in Jamaica to investigate the suspected murder of a fellow agent and his secretary, James Bond eludes several attempts on his life. With the help of CIA agent Felix Leiter and local fisherman Quarrel, Bond follows the sinister trail of Dr. No to his island Crab Key. Shortly after landing on the beach with Quarrel, Bond encounters alluring shell collector Honey Rider. The three uninvited visitors are hunted down by Dr. No's private army. He plans to destroy the US space program as his first move towards world domination. So there's two reasons for the synopsis there. I mean, one, I actually know there's only one reason. It's so we can refresh our memories on what happened in that film. Try and put some...
Well, it's true, because there was a lot of like, it did kind of drag a bit, because before it even gets to the island, because there's a lot of work to try and tell the audience that James Bond is not just some suave, guy who knows how to play cards and maybe knows how to charm one or two people, including maybe his bosses. He actually does recognise and figures out that he's being watched, and he uses a lot of just simple skills. He doesn't use any major gadgets to realise that someone's been in his room. He just uses simple, everyday things you could pick up from the supermarket to realise that someone had been in his room and he was being watched. Mm-hmm. And it was just the more sort of the simple, basic things which set this one apart from the more modern ones, to try and make sure that he could get, he could figure out what was going on and who was actually watching it.
In some ways, as much as for the time, it was probably very fresh and very new as a cinema experience for the people that saw it back in the early 60s. For us, it was very much an old school spy movie, especially when you compare it to the modern Bonds of today, and then other, action series like the Bourne trilogy and so on. But, we definitely had a hand over our mouths moment, a sort of WTF moment at the very beginning of this film, because the first sort of location is in Jamaica, and we see Strangways, who's the MI6 station chief out there in Kingston. And he very quickly gets murdered by, I'm going to call them the Three Blind Mice, because that's the theme that was playing when they were shown on screen for the first time.
Yes.
But it's basically these three guys who are walking along like they're completely blind. And Strangways is playing cards with three of his colleagues at this club. And basically they sort of kind of walk past, and then all of a sudden they use their white sticks to shoot the hell out of him. Well,
yeah.
No, they don't actually. He goes to go and get something, or he goes to his car or something. And then they just kind of rock up, like shoot the hell out of him. And then a hearse pulls up. It's all very efficient as well. But I mean, it was really violent. They just bang him up in the hearse, and then the hearse drives off, and that's it. He's disappeared. And then the next scene is his secretary, who's kind of operating the radio and so on. And then they appear at the window, and they just shoot her in cold blood as well. And then we see them go into the office, and they go through the filing cabinet, and they take a file which has got Dr. No's name on. Now, there was an interesting thing, the scene with the secretary, because she is obviously a more mature lady, shall we say. And when you see the shot of her, of her in full, on her hands, you can see the sort of age spots. But then when they do the close-up of her tweaking the volume dials and stuff, it's a very young hand.
Yeah.
And I was like,
you've looked at that more closely than
really,
I
noticed
really
it. I noticed it immediately. But the thing is, I'm a movie buff. I seem to always pick up on these sorts of things.
Or it's the Apple TV with the enhanced UHD.
Yeah, I don't even think it was that really, because even Carolina noticed it as well. Because I said to her, "Did you notice that?" And she goes, "Yeah." It's like they used a hand model for the close-up, which she just deems as them being, sexist and all the rest of it. Because we can't have a close-up of some, aging woman's hand. Ugh. Not for Bond's first time on the screen. So then, obviously, the news of Strangway's death reaches M over in London, who is the head of MI6, as we know today. And he calls James Bond in to investigate the matter. And this is where I got really excited, because I knew that Sean Connery had a car where the license plate sort of revolved and spikes came out, and he also had mud or oil slick or whatever coming out the back of the car, and then gun turrets in the headlights. And so, he calls Q in because he says, "You're still using a Beretta." And then Q comes in, and Q basically disses his gun and says, "Yeah, Beretta's fine if you're a woman." And then they tell him he's not going to use that gun. He's going to use a Walter PPK. And then and he gives him a box with the new gun in, and then he walks out. And that was it. There was
Hang on a minute. Did they not introduce the gadgets in the box at that time?
No. He basically
so they didn't.
So he basically M tells him off for still carrying a Beretta, and James Bond says he's used it for 10 years and it's never let him down. So there we get a bit of time placement that he's been in service for that, at least that length of time. M calls Q in, and Q comes in with a little wooden box, and it's got a Walter PPK in it, and he tells him it'll stop a man dead. Super reliable. If it's good enough for the CIA, it's good enough for us. It will take a silencer, and it won't reduce the stopping power by much, etc., etc. And then he takes, he takes Bond's Beretta off him, and he walks out.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm getting confused because there's later films where Q becomes a bit more of a character. Yeah. And then he starts introducing more of the gadgets. It doesn't do it.
No,
that is it.
Not at all. In fact, I mean, really, any gadgets that are in this film are on the baddie's side, not Bond. To be fair, now looking back at it, is actually quite nice, I think, because it really helped to show off the physicality of Sean Connery. What Bond can actually do when he's not assisted by all this tech. So then Bond goes out to Jamaica because he's got to investigate what's going on. And then this is where I was keeping track of the outfits, because he turns up at the airport in what initially looks like a brown suit, but I think it's actually charcoal. Then he goes to a grey plaid suit, and then a plain grey suit, lighter, and then he has a navy blazer with grey trousers, and he has his tuxedo, obviously. Oh no, before that, I've skipped ahead, because obviously after Strangways is murdered, we then cut to London to the Ambassadors Club, and that's where we meet Bond for the first time. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Idiot. How could I forget that?
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, the fact that he was in the casino playing Baccarat.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, well, sorry, because I was trying to talk about the credits and you were already in the film. We're going all over the place here. So we've talked about M and all of that, but before that, we get introduced to James Bond finally. So we have the opening scene with Strangways getting murdered and his secretary getting murdered, and then we cut to the Ambassadors Club in London, and this is where we first meet Bond. Let's talk about Connery's entrance as 007 on the big screen for the first time. How cool was that?
I mean, it wasn't even an entrance. He was just sitting down. He just looked to his left and he was like, Bond, James Bond. And it was just how seriously cool. Lit a cigarette where you could smoke indoors without anyone telling you, excuse me, I think you'll find this is a no smoking area, sir. It was absolutely fantastic. They were playing a professional game of Baccarat. And, he looked amazing. And he charmed the socks off of that girl and took her money.
Yeah, basically.
How cool is that?
But the thing is, she introduces herself as Sylvia Trench, doesn't she? And then he just pauses, sparks his fag up, and then James Bond. I was like, so cool. And his tux was awesome. Shawl lapel. He had this sort of Louis Roth turned back cuffs, which you don't see anymore. I don't get to do those for people anymore. People don't really request them unless they're having a smoking jacket made. You know, nice bib front shirt. He just looks physically imposing and also just so cool. And I totally agree with you that, yeah, that's when you go to a casino. Like, I've never actually been to one before, but imagine if you ever took me on one of your poker nights or whatever. That's how I would turn up dressed.
Yeah, you probably would, and you'd look completely out of place.
Yeah.
You'd look completely out of place. Or you'd look like the tournament director or the casino manager, you know, and you were expecting a special guest or something like that. But you wouldn't actually be like the real deal. It's nowadays people go to casinos to be comfortable and to escape their daily lives, so they don't really make an effort. The women do. The women dress up. The women look glam. But very rarely will you see a man sort of dressed in a suit to go to a casino.
That's the perennial problem these days, that women still dress better than guys overall.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You know, but then there's a lot of girls who are at a blackjack table or play poker or something like that. And they'll just be in a hoodie. They'll just be in jeans, t-shirt, you know, and then they'll play their cards and go from there, you know. And some of them, and it's, you know, some of them will sit at the cash tables, you know, with like 20, 30,000 in front of them, you know, betting hands of poker. Just, you know, not thinking twice about it. But they look like crap.
Yeah, it's just really sad, I think. I mean, for me, like, if I got invited to a casino or something, that would be like a massive night out. So I want to be dressed up for it. But yeah, I mean, you know, outfit-wise, I mean, when Bond eventually does get to Jamaica, he just, from the moment he gets off the plane and he's in the airport, he just oozes cool. The way that they dressed him for this was just so pleasing to my eye. And also Jack Lord as well. Jack Lord was playing Felix Leiter, the CIA agent. So basically the collaboration comes in because he's met by the CIA. They're investigating a case where a rocket launch from Cape Canaveral has been disrupted by someone jamming the radio frequency. So, yeah, he kind of gets there. And then we have that first kind of car chase type thing where, you know, a guy claims to be a chauffeur sent to collect him and he goes with him. But then it turns out that the guy was basically working for whoever it is that is trying to kill Bond. And that's where we see Sean Connery's first kind of fight, which Caroline is a massive fan of the Bourne movies and the Daniel Craig ones as well, the Daniel Craig Bond films. And to that fight with the chauffeur, she just went pathetic.
Yeah, it's
been a bit harsh.
That was the thing. Yeah, there wasn't a lot you could do. You know, there was however many frames. So they had to be able to get it all in, didn't they? So you couldn't just have really fast action, otherwise it wouldn't have been seen.
But also as well, it kind of, for me, it fits in more with Fleming's kind of Oh God, I can't talk today. I'm so tired. So tired, Phil. It fits in with Fleming's description of the character, which is a blunt instrument wielded by a government department, hard, ruthless, sardonic, fatalistic. He likes gambling, golf and fast motor cars. All his movements are fast and economical. And the fast and economical bit, I thought he ticked all the boxes. Or, you know, the fight choreographers ticked all the boxes.
I think so. I mean, the thing about it is that at that time, you know, they didn't have a lot of inspiration from the Far East or anything like that. They weren't sort of taking... The only sort of like films that they could really base it on was the Westerns and things like that. That's all they had in the 60s. So there was only so much that, not only that they could do, but also what the audience would be able to make sense of. You know, because they had to be able to sort of keep it in line with what else was going on at the time. I think that was a fact.
Yeah. He goes through some outfit changes quite quickly because he turns up in that sort of darker grey suit, and then in the evening when he goes to meet Felix Leiter at the club, he's in a lighter plain grey suit, and then Felix Leiter's wearing this really cool light brown kind of taupey sort of suit with a brown tie, and I thought it looked really cool. It's very typically American because the Americans will always go for the browns and so on, or that's what we kind of know them for. Whereas, us Brits tend to like our navies and greys quite a bit. All 2-button single-breasted. Again, Carolina commented that everything was really boxy and, didn't fit them properly, but I was trying to explain to her that that was the sort of style in those days, and I thought it actually worked quite well because Connery is quite a big, tall guy. He's quite broad-shouldered and, I think the tailoring being a little bit looser on him actually helped to accentuate that. To just sort of kind of almost cover up some of that power that's under the hood with him.
But also, the suits had to accommodate the fact these guys are carrying guns. They had to be able to easily access those as well. That was the other.
This is true. I didn't even think about that.
They all carry guns. They've all got them right in there. They need to be able to get to them easily.
Yeah.
If they're too tight, then they're going to see it.
That's it, exactly. And also, if they can't move their arms around, they're not going to be able to draw the gun quickly enough.
And they fight in their suits as well. So, and the materials then were a lot heavier, no doubt. So they probably needed to have something that was going to be looser and could move a little bit better. So there's only so much they can do.
The suit tailor was a chap called Anthony Sinclair. The shirts were from Turnbull and Asser. And I imagine, because, again, don't forget, they wouldn't have had a huge budget to throw at this. I think in total the film cost just over $1 million. And they had to be quite economical with everything. So I'm guessing they wouldn't have had the budget like they do nowadays. And nowadays, for a Daniel Craig film, they might have 10 to 20 of each suit made at various different sizes, so that as he moves through a scene, things that are very static, the suit is more fitted. And then when there's more action and there's more moving around and running and jumping, the suits are actually much bigger in size. They wouldn't have had the budget to do that in those days.
So you've read the books as well. So going back to the collab with CIA, is the CIA collaboration prevalent in the Dr. No book as well?
I've not read Dr. No.
You've not read Dr. No?
I've not read the
other books?
The only Fleming book I've read is Casino Royale.
So the only reason that there's this collaboration with the CIA and this kind of mix up with the Americans is so that they can have a combined sort of production with the American sort of producers. Is that the reason why, or are they all British?
I see what you're wondering. I don't know is the answer to that, but I will find out for you. But you'll have to wait a month because I need to let the audience know as well, and or I can actually look it up if you want. Yeah, I'll quickly look it up while you talk about another character, Quarrel, the boat guy, and his bright red T-shirt. Which is
you had one of those,
exactly
didn't you?
So did you when we worked at Comet, matey. Yes, we wore bright red T-shirts as.
They weren't that bright.
Yeah, they weren't as bright as that. I mean, the kind of guy that. I mean, could they not have had a word with him before they took him on this adventure to say, could you just tone it down a little bit, mate, because the bad guys are going to spot you from like a mile away?
Yeah, well, it's the thing. It's suspend disbelief, isn't it? That's what it's all about. Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, the bits kind of in the middle. That kind of period where the bad guys are trying to figure out and trying to fleece out where James Bond is and who he is and what business he has on the island. James Bond wants to look at the island. No one will take him. This is the only guy that will do it. And it's only when he actually gets on the island that's when I get really excited and interested in the film again. So the bits in between, I've got to be honest. While they did stitch the film together, and they're important to the film, I'm more excited and interested by the beginning and the end. I'm a starters and dessert kind of guy. What can I say?
I don't think so. To go back to what you were asking about whether they changed the story to kind of get the CIA involved and sort of the American producers and all that sort of thing. So it's from an interview here, and a chap called Paul Duncan. The 43-page treatment, dated September the 7th, 1961, uses only a few superficial elements from the novel. Honey Rider, a Chinese girl, Felix Leiter, Bond's CIA pal, and the Jamaican setting. The villain of the piece is Buckfield, an arms smuggler who plans to stuff a ship full of explosives and blow it up in the Panama Canal under the Cuban flag, thus creating a profitable demand for his wares. Although the storyline was rejected, the writers were trying to utilise the real-world tension between East and West after the disaster of the Bay of Pigs invasion early in 1961, and anticipated the Cuban Missile Crisis, which started in October the following year and found the world on the brink of nuclear war.
Right, that makes sense. Okay.
So they were basically kind of more influenced by what was going on around the time than, anything for the sort of benefit of the film. I think the only problem
because that's the thing, when they were making the film, the whole Bay of Pigs crisis was going on, because it was 61 the Bay of Pigs happened, and the film came out in 62, so you're probably making it around the time when that was going on. So probably had to be a bit sensitive.
Yeah, exactly. They basically find out that Strangways was trying to pinpoint the origin of this radio jamming signal that was coming from Jamaica. And Quarrel reveals that before Strangways died, he'd been collecting mineral samples from an island called Crab Key. Bond basically tracks down this local geologist called Professor Dent, and makes some inquiries with him about the samples in Crab Key. But then he's not happy with Professor Dent's answers. Professor Dent basically says the samples are just kind of, they're normal. There's nothing special about them or anything.
There's nothing special about them.
Whereas we later find out, obviously, that they were radioactive because of all the stuff that Dr. No is up to on his little base. So then Dent travels to Crab Key to meet this mysterious owner of the island, tell him that Bond's kind of turned up. And that's where we first hear the voice of Dr. No. And I'm really gagging to look up if the character, even in the film, is meant to be Chinese and they got a British actor to play him.
Yeah, I don't think he actually necessarily had any.
No.
Specific.
Sorry, I answered my own question. I actually, because later in the film, it's explained when they sit down to dinner, when Bond and Honey are held captive, that he is half Chinese, half German or Austrian, something like that.
Okay.
And then he basically he kind of headed up something for China, and Bond says that's quite surprising that they would let someone who's not pure-blooded, run their thing.
That makes I'm just trying to remember.
Because I'm totally fresh on this, whereas what are you on? So you've done from Russia with Love.
Yeah. Done Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah.
And
have you done Thunderball?
No, what happened was I thought that the next one in the list was Diamonds Are Forever. So the next one on my streaming list was it says the next one on this list is this, and then when I look back on it, because it seemed quite far down the track, and it looked like Sean Connery had aged quite a bit. And I just thought that don't make sense. And I looked back over it, and I'd missed about 3. So
yeah.
So I'll just have to go back.
So you need to go back to Thunderball then. Yeah.
Thunderball, and there's another one as well.
But I mean, you're sort of further ahead than me, and considering that we've kind of set this as a once a month kind of thing, it's going to take me ages to catch up. I'm never going to catch up with you. Apart from when we get to the Brosnan and the Daniel Craig films, which I've seen many, many times. Especially GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Die. Anyway, sorry, we're going off piste here. The geologist Professor Dent goes to see his overlord, and his overlord basically wants him to assassinate Bond, and he gives him a tarantula.
Yeah.
Sort of says, go over to the cage. So he goes over to the cage, and there's this cute little tarantula. Well, not little, it's massive tarantula in there. I thought he was going to make him put his hand in, but he doesn't. He just makes him pick it up, and then he takes it with him.
Yeah. It's almost like with that scene where he's speaking to him and then he's got that booming voice, it's almost like Wizard of Oz, where they all go in and meet the wizard. And it's like, there's a projection of it. You don't actually see who it is. But then, the Wizard of Oz is revealed. And I'm sure for the people who view the villain in this film, they're probably a little bit underwhelmed when they see it's just a geeky-looking guy who's a bit obsessed about taking over the world. Yeah. So, it's almost short man syndrome.
He will talk about his hands later as well, because it really reminded me of another villain from pop culture and our childhood. We'll come on to that. So, I mean, just to go back to Professor Dent, actually, the way that he dresses is very much like, a geography teacher in summer, sort of getting to the end of the summer term. So, sort of very kind of ill-fitting linen, massive notched lapels, 3-button, cream linen trousers.
I'm sure for that sort of person of that age back in the early 60s, I'm sure that was very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it did suit him. It's very sort of, older English guy type of sort of thing.
But it's hard, though, because that whole period was getting to the point where, rock and roll, was in its height. And so they were trying to find something that was going to be something different. And it probably went against the grain in terms of some of the other films that were out, because they were trying to appeal to, this new breed of teenagers. And I don't think it necessarily appealed to them. But they couldn't do something that was trying to be of the time completely either. They found quite a decent balance, but it was never easy to get every style right for all the characters, and I think he was one of them.
No, exactly. We didn't talk about Bond's, when he leaves his room, and you mentioned it at the very beginning when, Bond, after meeting Trench, when he leaves his hotel room, just beforehand, he puts a strand of hair across the closet door, and then he dusts sort of talcum powder onto the latches of his briefcase. A very old school way of sort of working out whether someone's interfered with things when he gets back. And it's interesting that he kind of comes back and realises that someone's obviously been in there. And then it's revealed it's Trench, who's sort of standing there completely naked and but for one of his shirts and wearing a pair of high heels, kind of playing, indoor golf. I don't know what you call those things.
Playing some golf,
But then the thing that you kind of miss, because, we're thinking, okay, this is the first one he's going to sleep with as we, start playing James Bond bingo. She's obviously the person that's actually been searching through all this stuff. Yeah. But I only realised that now. because she was quite distracting. And I don't mean it in an Ursula Andress way. I mean, she was distracting in that it was who was she played by? Sylvia played by Eunice Gayson, which is, a very sort of 60s, 50s, 40s English name. But the makeup she had sort of, it was like they were trying to make her look a bit oriental with a stupid wig. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but her eyebrows look like when Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story kind of gets upended and his bits go on in the wrong place, because one eyebrow was in a normal place and the other eyebrow would literally look like it was on top of her head. And I realised that's the actress sort of doing that one eyebrow lifting thing that I can't do, that all women seem to be able to do, especially when they tell us to do the washing up and we pretend that we didn't hear them. And some guys can do, but I can't do. But it did just look really, really odd. And maybe that's where my very high resolution copy of this film did not help, because she looked awful.
No.
But anyway, she was very distracting, and I would imagine maybe Bond got distracted by that, because he doesn't seem to sort of realise she's on the wrong side until, she kind of directs him to her place a bit later on, and, then he kind of clocks the telephone conversation, everything, that she's trying to detain him for a couple of hours and all of that sort of stuff. What did you kind of think about his first amorous encounter?
I mean, for me, it's, I would say that the really, really great part of it was when Ursula Andress came out. And the funny thing was...
We're talking about Trench here.
I know we're talking about Trench, but I'm kind of over Trench.
You really want to get to Andress, don't you?
Well, it's only because in many ways he's trying to... You get the sense that he's there to kind of like be the sort of like, be the strong dominant force, male dominant force. But the reality was she was doing fine before he showed up. She was making money from those shells and selling them. And then when he showed up, he completely screwed up that entire operation. And she ended up getting captured. So it just and she was just, they let her just kind of like, do whatever she wanted to do. But then when he showed up, it was, she had to kind of, she became the Bond girl and just to, aside.
She got kind of sort of demoted very, very quickly, didn't she? I mean, but just before he gets to the island and he meets Honey, he has to deal with Professor Dent, who's obviously trying to kill him with that tarantula. And interesting fact about the making of is that they filmed it the first time around with a glass partition between Connery and the tarantula, so that the idea was to film through it as if the tarantula was crawling over him. But when they looked back,
very Pinewood Studios.
Yeah,
very Pinewood Studios. When they do that in a lot of those films.
Yeah, so when they look back at it, the director decided that he did not like the way it looked on film, and so they got a poor stuntman in to double for Connery. So all of the close-up shots with the tarantula crawling on the body are the poor stuntman, and he said it was the most terrifying experience of his life to date.
Yeah.
And then obviously, and that's it. When you look back at that scene, you can see how that was then cut together. So yeah, I thought that was just really interesting. And then Strangways obviously Dent comes to sort of finish the job once Bond has basically confirmed that the rock samples that Strangways had collected were actually radioactive, meaning there was something bigger going on the island. He then kills Dent and then gets to the island. To the bit that you want to talk about is the introduction of Honey Rider.
What's really cool about it is, in this film, the women typically are independent women that are very much their own people. They don't need anyone else. And so even though it's very much a kind of seen as very sort of male chauvinist and very much about, the man basically takes what he wants and that's it. From what I've seen in the early James Bond films, the women are actually quite independent. They got their own money. They've got their own resources. I mean, like Honey Rider, her name's Honey Rider, but, she's an independent entrepreneurial woman. She's on an island. She's found a niche, carved a niche for herself. She sells shells for, a lot of money at the time, and she's doing it by herself. She doesn't have anyone telling her to do it. She's doing it for herself. But she happens to be absolutely gorgeous. She doesn't have the kind of ravages of like modern day women where everyone's got the fake tan or plastic or anything like that. She's just a normal, and she was an athlete at the time when she did the film, or she was a retired athlete. I think, was she from Hungary, Ursula Andress?
So she was.
She's certainly.
She was.
I think she's Hungarian.
She's Swiss.
No, that's
actually she was born in Switzerland.
Okay.
In Ostermundigen.
Right.
Probably haven't pronounced that properly, but Swiss mother and German father.
Right, yeah. So there's that whole, background of, athletic, European women. And she was perfect for the part. She looked amazing. That's what struck me about these films, is the fact that we see it and there's certain things that are completely not, politically correct to say now. But they actually did a lot for women at the time.
Well, in fact,
and
in actual fact, she has quite a dark tale to tell, because obviously Bond encounters her on the island, and then all of a sudden the soldiers on the boat come and shoot at them and so on, and then say that they're going to come back with dogs, And while they're holed up, she tells Bond quite a dark story from her youth. You know, she was sexually abused, and so she took her revenge by, you know, having the guy offed using a Black Widow spider, and he suffered for a week before he died. To which Bond kind of, you know, sort of says, well, don't make a habit out of it, which I imagine to be sort of tongue-in-cheek to say, don't do that to me.
Oh,
but at the same, you know, sort of looking back, I think they did such a good job with that sort of little backstory to her, making her more than meets the eye, more than just kind of innocent eye candy that can't fend for herself. Well, you know, obviously we're going to talk about what happens afterwards once they get to the actual lair of Dr. No, but up to this point you're thinking, okay, fine, well, she's not just some dolly bird that's come out of the sea in a bikini that collects shells. I mean, there's more to her than that, and she can probably look after herself. I wish almost that they didn't have Bond make that sort of line about don't make a habit out of it. I wish they'd just sort of left it at her story.
Yeah.
But, you know, in any case, they then just throw all of that in the bin by, as you quite rightly said a little while ago, suddenly she becomes a sort of helpless, you know, leave him alone, don't hurt him. Or, no, I want to stay with you, you know, rather than, you know, sort of, listen, you know, I was here before you, mate, and I don't know what the hell all this is about. I just want to go back to collecting my shells and go back to my sort of peaceful life.
Yeah, because she must have known her way around the island to be able to evade capture for so long. Or it's not like they were ignoring her. They wouldn't have been happy about her doing that. No one else was anywhere near the island. Everyone else was scared of it. So what did she do, or what was it about her that made her not fearful of it and not give a toss and just carry on with what she was doing? And then all of a sudden she's captured because some guy shows up and ruins her whole operation, basically.
I think, you know, part of the backstory that she, you know, the story that she tells Bond about what happened to her when she was younger and, you know, her having to deal with that in the most extreme way, justified as well, might I add, in case anyone asks me. She is a survivor and she is able to look after herself, and you're absolutely right. She probably does know her way around the island, and she talks about the dragon when Quarrel mentions the dragon as well. You know, they've both seen this dragon and it breathes fire and it's got ears and a tail and teeth and so on. But she's obviously, you know, sort of kind of got used to kind of evading all the bad people that are sort of around there, so she can just go about her quiet business of collecting shells. And they probably actually do know about her, but they just see her. I think she actually says it at one point, actually, that, you know, she just collects her shells minding her own business, and they don't seem to be bothered about her at all. And, you know, why would they? They can clearly see that in their eyes that she's potentially harmless. But then speaking about Quarrel and the dragon, the dragon does turn up, and this is the first real gadget of the film, and it belongs to the baddies, and it's basically what can only be described as an armoured tank with a dragon's face drawn on it, and it literally spits fire out. And poor Quarrel is in the line of said fire, and it was just really sudden. This thing turns up out of nowhere, and they're trying to shoot at it, and then, you know, Bond sort of tells Quarrel, you go up ahead and take out the driver while I take out the lights and the tyres. Yeah, thanks, Bond. You take the easy job. And then the thing just throws out this flame and absolutely cooks the poor guy. We had our hands over our mouths. We were so shocked. We were like, oh my God. And it was quite violent, how he met his end. It was awful.
Yeah, I think that's another thing about that time period, because, like, in terms of the ratings that they had for films, it was either suitable for all, or it was A, which meant that you could watch it if an adult was present, or it was an X, and it wasn't quite an X, but it was just about an A, and they allowed it to be an A as long as, like, children were present. So there was a lot of things that they could get away with. There wasn't any nudity, and there wasn't any really, you know, there wasn't any foul language. So it was enough to kind of keep it within that, you know, there wasn't any sort of obvious sort of murder scenes like, you know, Psycho was released sort of the year or two before, for example, you know, and it wasn't a Western, you know, with loads of violence. So it kind of fell in that in-between bit. So there was just enough violence, but not quite enough to make it
Yeah.
Next.
Well, speaking of nudity, Bond and Honey obviously get captured and they're taken to Dr. No's lair, we'll call it. And obviously the first thing that they're made to do is to strip down and take their clothes off and then get all the radiation washed off them, because they've obviously been in the swamps and they're highly radioactive and they've obviously got all of that radiation on themselves. And I thought there was a bit of a flash of Ursula Andress's...
No, there wasn't. They talk about this, but there wasn't.
I imagine she was wearing
protected.
a skin suit or something to protect her modesty.
She was protected. They would never have allowed that. I mean, even, the films at that time, there was no nudity allowed in any film at all.
What year was Barbarella?
It was later than that. That would have been that would have been about 67, 68, something like that. But that was acceptable because at that time there was a lot of movement into the 60s with free love and stuff like that, where you could show films like that, and there was more of that available.
You're right,
but
yeah.
in the early 60s,
Barbarella,
it was completely not...
1968, you're right.
But you were never allowed to show any kind of nudity. I mean, even the film... Do you know the film Psycho? That's the very first film where you actually see a flushing toilet.
Oh, wow.
Before that, you don't see a flushing toilet in a Hollywood film. And even though she's dead in the shower, she's wearing a skin suit, so you don't see any of her. Believe me, they would have definitely covered it.
Yeah. Well, this is where...
And you've got the ultra high definition. You could have, slowed it down and really find out.
But my wife was sitting next to me, so couldn't really... it's on my iPhone, though. I could actually go back and have a look. I won't do that. I'm not that sad. But I might. In the interest of, accuracy. So anyway, they this is where we actually first meet Dr. No in the flesh, and he is a Chinese-German criminal scientist who has prosthetic metal hands due to radiation exposure. And it really reminded me of Han from Enter the Dragon. Now, Enter the Dragon was 10 years later, so,
Yes, it was.
Obviously, you could... Han obviously was modelled on Dr. No, right? Had to have been. Han's Island.
No, I don't think so.
All of that. You don't think so?
I think I would like to think, although it was billed as Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon was the Cantonese James Bond. I would like to think that Han was a character from a Hong Kong based film as opposed to an American film. I'd like to think that they got their inspiration from something that they had produced from years gone by, rather than just taking it from Hollywood.
Yeah.
But they did. But it was Bruce Lee was James Bond in Enter the Dragon. Yeah. That was what that was all about.
Totally. Is what it was meant to be. It wouldn't surprise me if Warner Brothers thought that they were going to be kicking off some sort of franchise with it. Had Bruce Lee sadly not died.
I'm sure they would have done. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, because an absolute tragedy that he only made. Although he made hundreds of films in Hong Kong, he's only really made
just the four big ones.
4 films.
Yeah, and then Game of Death technically doesn't quite count because it wasn't finished. And I have seen...
Yeah.
But
the concept of Game of Death is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was going to be the ultimate martial arts movie. I mean, the thing with Game of Death, and again, we're digressing here, but the thing with Game of Death, since we're talking about it, is that thank God he filmed the pagoda stuff first.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Death, but obviously they got an actor in to sort of do the rest of it, and... it is not good.
Oh, yes, I have seen it, but years ago. But I mean, when I think of Game of Death, I just think about the fact that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar happened to be in Hong Kong and Bruce Lee was there at the same time. He says, right, well, you're here now. Let's just shoot a scene quickly while you're here. And that's what they did. And then everything else kind of blossomed.
They had the relationship because, he was teaching... He was teaching Abdul-Jabbar as well, wasn't he? Anyway, we digress because we're supposed to be talking about Dr. No, so let's get back to it. So Bond, so they have dinner with Dr. No, and Bond learns that he was a former member of a Chinese crime gang called the Tong, up until he stole $10 million from them in gold, which by today's standards, and definitely by Dr. Evil standards, does not sound like much at all.
Oh, in the 60s, that would have been a huge amount.
Absolutely.
Huge amount.
But he's now working for the secret organisation known as Spectre. Can you remember what Spectre stands for, Phil?
No!
It's the... And this is the problem with the Spectre acronym, is that it doesn't serve its purpose because no one can remember what it stands for. It stands for the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge and Extortion.
Fantastic. That's a nice easy one to remember. It just falls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Exactly. So, interesting thing for me here is because I do know that Blofeld makes an appearance, if not in the next film, definitely the one after, but Blofeld is coming. And Blofeld obviously is the head of Spectre. I'm now wondering, having previously thought that the Daniel Craig movies were the only ones that were linked in any way, I'm now wondering if this first set of Connery movies are actually linked together, because Spectre is the sort of concurrent theme through all of them. Don't tell me.
You will find out.
Don't tell me.
You will find out.
But that's what I'm wondering. So that's actually quite exciting. So they're basically busy hacking into, or jamming the radios of the space launch at Cape Canaveral, using radio beams, which they obviously transmit from the base in Jamaica. And this is to demonstrate Spectre's power. And he basically, the reason we're all sort of wondering at this point, why hasn't he just killed Bond? But the reason why is because he wants Bond to join them, which obviously Bond refuses to do. And then Dr. No gets very, very angry, has Honey taken away, and then Bond is imprisoned. Then he manages to escape through an air vent. And I actually found this kind of entire scene of him, first electrocuting himself on the grill, and then he climbs through the air vent system, and then there's that sort of almost boiling hot water that sort of flushes down the pipe, and he has to deal with that and so on. And there's a vulnerability to him there that I've never seen with the Sean Connery character. That's never been my perception of him, because I haven't seen these films in full. But I thought it was very, very well done, and it added more layer and nuance to the character for me.
Yeah, and I would say, from what I've seen so far, that there are still traces of that sensitivity, although he doesn't necessarily show it, or he's told, or the direction of it from the other people that make those films tell him to kind of like tone it down in future films. But certainly in this one, they don't really know what to expect, and they allow him to kind of do it in such a way that does show that side of him. Because I think at this point, they're not 100% sure whether or not they're going to be a success. They had however many... I think they had 6 set up for the actor that was going to play James Bond, and they had many other actors before they chose Sean Connery. But... So I suppose they needed to have different dimensions, and they weren't sure what direction it was going to go. But they knew it would evolve throughout the 6 films, and I think it was just interesting how it all began and how it started.
Yeah, and we can definitely touch on, other casting choices for Bond, maybe when we talk about the next film on the next one, because otherwise we could be here forever, because they're just such a wealth of information and stories to go through. So he escapes through the air vent, and then he knocks out the guy in the hazmat suit, and he puts the suit on, and that's how he's able to get into the control center of the base. This next sequence in the base, where he sort of disrupts all of that and stops the whatever it is they're doing from disrupting the launch of the rocket over in Florida. I've obviously seen some kind of volcanic base with buggies driving around a la Dr. Evil. I might have been getting it mixed up with Austin Powers, actually, but I'm pretty sure I have in a Connery Bond film. but I don't know which one it is. But I must. But I thought it was this one, and so I was kind of a bit pleasantly surprised that, oh, hang on, then this is not suddenly gone to a moon base. It's still on this island in Jamaica, and they're basically all just sitting behind controls, not really doing much apart from pressing buttons and shouting at each other. But then it all moves really, really quickly, because he sort of goes to the guy that was sort of ramping up the radiation frequency or whatever, and then they've got that sort of uranium rods or radiation rods or whatever they are underwater, and it's obviously all boiling hot with radiation. And then he knocks that guy out, and then all chaos breaks loose, and everybody starts running and trying to escape. And then Dr. No goes to go and beat 7 shades of you-know-what out of him with his metal hands. And then Bond kind of gets the better of him on that little platform. And then all of a sudden, like, you blink, and all of a sudden it's like Dr. No's screaming for his life, and he's boiled to death, and his hands are clawing at the thing. But it just happens so quickly. It's not... None of the deaths in this are long drawn out. It's all quick and efficient, for want of a better word.
And that's what his movement is in the book, as you say. It's all about quick, efficient movements. So that's all that he needs to do, and he does it as quickly as possible. Yeah. He Occam's razors them. So.
And then, so obviously, the last thing that he needs to do is find Honey and free her. Obviously, we know that Bond villains love tying people up and not actually killing them. I mean, if they actually just got on and killed them, then probably their nefarious plans would actually come to fruition a bit more often. So he unties her, and they manage to escape the island by boat, and then the whole thing blows up. And then we get what I know is a classic sort of Bond ending from the older movies, especially the Roger Moore ones. I don't know if they carry this on with the Bond with the Connery films, but definitely we see this a few times in the Roger Moore movies. Whether he's up in space, on a boat, in a plane, it doesn't really matter with that guy. He's getting laid before the end credits. They get down to some loving in the boat, and then Felix kind of turns up, finds them adrift, throws them a rope, and then as they embrace again, Connery just lets the rope slip out of his hands and sort of end the film. And that's it. It was all over in the blink of an eye.
That's it, yeah. But immediately at the end of the film, it then tells you, and you'll see James Bond again next in From Russia with Love. And so you straight away, you're right, I've got to see the next film. And it's that kind of thing, and it's a really nice way of actually sort of moving to the next film.
Yeah, because I don't think they wasted any time in sort of moving on to film From Russia with Love. I mean, that'll be my next sort of bit of homework. But From Russia with Love literally came out the following year, 1963.
It's straight up. It's pretty much straight afterwards. And I think because a lot of it was filmed in Pinewood, it wouldn't have surprised me if they had went from that project to the From Russia with Love project, shot some of those scenes as well, sort of like, as a, carryover, where you went from one to the other, because they were in Pinewood at the time. So it would have been easy for them to do that. They probably didn't, but they would have known that they were going to do From Russia with Love, so they might have done some scenes.
Yeah. I was actually really impressed with this film. I had to keep remembering that it's 1962, but I was really impressed with it. I thought Connery was absolutely fantastic, really. And I can see why there are people who, steadfastly refuse to budge from the position that he is the best Bond. So I'm really, really looking forward to seeing more of his movies.
I think the other thing is that, they could have very easily used certain positions to be exploitative towards other people in it. The Jamaicans are in it. They're not exploiting them. They're not using anything racist or anything. It is, certain people are the villains, certain people are the heroes. There isn't an obvious stereotypical sort of characterization of any particular background, which they could have easily done at that time as well. And they shied away from that, which is another reason why the film has stood up for so long. so far out of the ones I've seen, Dr. No is still my favourite. But time will tell if if I get to as time goes on to see if I get to enjoy any of the other.
I'm really excited to see From Russia with Love now because that's hailed as being the best of the Connery era. And I really, really want to see how I feel about that once I've seen it. We haven't talked about the score.
The score is just that one, that there isn't really anything else. It's that just, and everything just kind of feeds
the
off
James
of
Bond
that.
theme is played quite a lot through it, whereas in later films it's used sparingly, usually through action sequences and so on, and then you get little riffs of the theme through other parts as well. But it's timeless, isn't it? I mean...
Yeah, absolutely. It's like there's that one note that the symphony puts in when the end of the soundtrack, whatever the theme song is, they'll have that note that kind of goes... I can't even describe it. It's just... that sort of...
I know what you mean. Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
That end sort of electric guitar sort of...
That drowns down, and that's at the end of every soundtrack, no matter what it is. It'll have that, and it just feeds nicely into either introducing the bad guys or bringing up some tragedy, or there'll be something that you need to pay attention to. And it just
the James Bond theme has easily got to be one of the most, if not the most, recognisable film theme ever. I mean, that comes on, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, you instantly recognise that as James Bond. I mean, David Arnold, who did most of the composition work throughout the Bond era, I think he described it really beautifully as a bebop swing vibe coupled with that vicious, dark, distorted electric guitar, definitely an instrument of rock and roll. Represented everything about the character you would want. It was cocky, swaggering, confident, dark, dangerous, suggestive, sexy, unstoppable. And John Barry did it in 2 minutes. Sums it up beautifully for me.
It was really good. Yeah, absolutely. But I must say, the films that David Arnold's produced the soundtrack for, those are the ones I remember most in terms of soundtrack. I've always loved his production.
Did such a great job. I mean, I had the scores to GoldenEye, all of the Brosnan ones, apart from Die Another Day, actually. I was so repulsed by that film.
We do still have to review that.
We are.
Do you know what, though? That film was released like 20 plus years ago. We might be able to kind of like watch it this time and think, actually it's not so bad.
Yeah, maybe. But
we could.
I loved what David Arnold did with the World Is Not Enough score. It was absolutely, and actually Tomorrow Never Dies as well. I think he's just such a great composer, and he did some really great sort of, kind of off-piece work with the propeller heads as well. They sort of did a sort of revamp of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is just absolutely superb. I mean, back in the days when there were no speed cameras and you could, drive as fast as you shouldn't, it was just the best thing to have on in the car. I used to do a long run from Croydon to Essex every day when I worked up there. But yeah, just absolutely awesome.
Yes.
But yeah, no, so the John Barry theme, absolute classic, absolutely loved it. Anyone outside of Ursula Andress and Sean Connery that stood out for you?
I would say like the first sort of time we see the kind of the chauffeur who's picking up at the airport, and the way that they tried to portray the villains and tried to portray the deceit in trying to put that on screen. And they had to make it slightly obvious that this was a bad guy, but it had to be someone that could still be semi-trusted by Bond. But Bond still had to check him out. He goes, did you ask for someone to pick me up? I said, no, we didn't. He says, well, I've got anyway.
I have to confess, Phil, that he actually reminded me a little bit of you.
Oh, yeah? In what way?
I don't know, I just sort of looked at him. But actually, for a second, I could see Daniel in there.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Daniel, for listeners that don't know, is Phil's youngest son and my godson. But yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, it was the fact that Connery wasn't really sweating, and this guy had like sweat patches under his arms as if he was, in Dragon's Den or something. So yeah, okay. So it was the kind of villains for you and the characterization and.
I like that, yeah, absolutely, because it's very hard to sort of get it right, because everyone's at that time was a real sort of caricature, unless a film was made by Alfred Hitchcock at that time. If it was Alfred Hitchcock, it was very hard to figure out who the villains were, and it drew you in and it made you watch it more closely. But this was a bit more of an adventure, so there was a little bit more of a thing where they had to make it slightly obvious, but not really, really in your face. And it was just, and I like the way that they put that on screen. And then as the characters and the films have evolved, they've kept it kind of to that, but at the same time, there is a little bit more, particularly, as times most recently, you really, really see the motives of the bad guys, which you don't really see in these early films. They're just mad, they're just evil, they're just deranged, and there's nothing anyone can do about it, and only violence can destroy violence. That's it. There's no sort of mental health counselling or anything like that in these films. It's just pure on violence and shooting and death.
On the subject of violence and mental health, when it was released, Dr. No received quite a mixed reception from the critics. So I'm going to read some of the comments to you here. So Time magazine referred to Bond as a blithering bounder and a great big hairy marshmallow who almost always manages to seem slightly silly.
See, he wasn't even that hairy.
I mean, he was a bit hairy. Not compared to Daniel Craig.
Really that...
Daniel Craig is like a baby, he's hairless.
But I mean, you would be if you just wax everything. But I mean, it wasn't that hairy. It's for the time, they all look like, really hairy bodies. They never took care of themselves in that regard.
From hairy bodies to heavenly bodies, the Vatican condemned Dr. No. They described it as a dangerous mixture of violence, vulgarity, sadism, and sex.
I bet they loved that review. I bet it sold by the bucket load after that. So I bet they absolutely loved that review.
The Kremlin weighed in with the following: Bond is the personification of capitalist evil.
Yep. Awesome. Hang on, you said film reviews. You said the Kremlin. You said the Vatican. These aren't film reviews.
Well, I said critics. Critics could be anyone, Phil.
Okay,
so film reviews. The Guardian, they actually liked it. They said it was a very neat and gripping thriller, and it was very crisp and well tailored.
British press, they'll support their own. Fair enough. Yeah.
Daily Express, they said Dr. No is fun all the way, even the sex is harmless.
Fair enough. Like they'd know. Okay, fair enough.
Then, a bit later on in 1986, a critic called Danny Peary. So his review: cleverly conceived adaptation of Ian Fleming's enjoyable spy thriller. The picture has sex, violence, wit, terrific action sequences, and colourful atmosphere. Connery, Andrus, and Wiseman all give memorable performances. There's a slow stretch in the middle, which you actually referred to. And Dr. No could use a decent henchman. I was almost wishing for an Odd Job or
Jaws.
An Odd Job or someone, since there were some Asian people hanging around. I thought we might make an appearance. But Odd Job was actually a Roger Moore villain, wasn't he? Because wasn't he Scaramanga's guy? No, Odd Job was the big guy, wasn't he?
No.
Odd Job had the bowler hat, which would.
Yeah, so he was in Diamonds. He was in Diamonds Are Forever. We'll come to that another one, but yeah, he was definitely a Sean Connery villain.
So anyway, there we go. I mean, look, on Rotten Tomatoes, which is what I always go by, it has a 95% positive rating, which is about
That's
right.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty much as good as it can get. Yeah.
So what I'd like to do with these films, Phil, is for each of us to give a rating out of 10. I'm going to go with an 8. That's what my gut tells me. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Couple of, I guess, slight problems, but I'm not sure if that's just because of the time that's passed and because I'm a child of this era, not that era. But it was a really, really solid first entry, and I thought Connery was absolutely fantastic in the role. How about you?
I'm giving it a 7 out of 10, and the reason for that is it's very much a starter and dessert. There's a lot in the middle that could have been actually sort of edited down for content. I understand why they did that with this film, though. I think the direction that it went in, they were not really sure what they wanted to do in terms of who they were going to portray. It may have even been that the Jack Lord character was going to be a staple that was going to be in it more regularly. They may have wanted that. So that's probably why there was quite a few scenes with him in it, and it might have been similar to The Persuaders, where, you know, Tony Curtis and Roger Moore get together and they do a TV show where you got an American and a Brit fighting crime, and they may have wanted to go down that angle. So it's probably why there was various different directions in that regard. So that's why I'm giving it a 7, purely because they're not sure at that time the direction it was going into.
Yeah.
And they established it a little bit more in the later films.
But the average critical rating across all reviews is currently 7.8 out of 10. So you and I are actually bang on pretty much in line with the general critical consensus over the last 60 odd years.
I think the fact that there's like 25 odd films here, while it's, you know, I'm reserving judgment, I may increase the rating later on, but based on what I've seen, you know, I'm not gonna. I'm not saying it's a final judgment, but I think 7 is fair.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember when Hawaii 5-0 was a thing, because I remember it being...
It was later than this, much later.
It wasn't that much later. It was 1968 to 1980. And I remember Jack Lord being a bit older. I mean, I was very, very young. I was like 2 or 3 years old. But I always remember the theme.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess it was reruns that I would have seen, you know, sort of after it finished in 1980. So I might have been seeing reruns in 83, 84 when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I just remember the title sequence because it was, you know, it was the music, and all of that. You don't know it?
I know it, but I think... I don't know. It just didn't interest me. I was into A-Team and Knight Rider. So it's just,
so was I. A-Team, Knight Rider, Airwolf, Blue Thunder, Street Hawk, Manimal, Incredible Hulk. You know,
Street Hawk. Blimey, that brings back memories. My goodness, Street Hawk.
All the vehicle ones. Remember, there was like this whole period where there was just
was it Airwolf as well?
Blue Thunder, the other helicopter one with Roy Schneider was in that.
Yeah.
Airwolf
was it?
Yeah.
Roy Schneider did a TV show.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Roy Schneider was...
What, as the main character, the main actor?
Yeah, see, we've gone off piste again because...
Are you sure?
Yeah, Blue Thunder. So there was Airwolf and Blue Thunder.
My goodness.
And Blue Thunder basically starred Roy Scheider. Yep, there you go.
It must have cost a fortune to make that. He was a massive actor.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Fair play to him.
Because then there was Airwolf, which was the black and white helicopter that was bulletproof and stuff with Jan Michael Vincent.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, Goldo, the Fall Guy, Lee Majors, Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah, I saw Fall Guy. I used to watch Fall Guy. Yeah, I used to watch Dukes of Hazzard, of course. Had the Dukes of Hazzard car. Talking about this whole period of like Bond, I'm going to leave you with this one little story. When I was 6 years old, I went to the hospital. I had an overnight stay in the hospital because I had an operation. All right. And when I recovered from the operation, my family came to see me, and the next day I was going home. But because I had actually got through the operation, my dad bought me a Bond car, one of those corgi cars.
Yeah, I remember.
It was the shittest Bond car out of all of them. Guess which one it was?
No idea. You tell me.
It was the 2CV Citroen from For Your Eyes Only.
My dad used to come back with corgi cars and he'd buy me Maseratis, Ferraris, Aston Martins, all the cool ones.
All he knew was it was a Bond car and he thought Philip might like that. And it was a Citroen 2CV, the yellow one. My dad bought me. And I thought it was great, but I wasn't really into Bond at that time. But I just saw it as a car. Later on, I saw For Your Eyes Only, and I saw it was the girl was driving down the hill and up the hill.
We could have got you the Lotus Esprit.
But yeah, there was. I mean, out of all of the Bond cars, this was the one that he got. I wish I kept the box. I bet it'd be worth a fortune now.
I bet. I'm going to leave you with something that Cubby Broccoli said when asked to comment on the success of Dr. No, and obviously what they'd managed to achieve getting that film to the screen. And he said this. He said, "What mattered to me personally was that the big success of the film totally confirmed my belief in Bond when major studio producers were turning it down. The film cost $1 million, but it took back worldwide more than 20 times that, with TV residuals still to come. I had to smile. United Artists had seen the test on Sean Connery and had asked if we could do better. The bookers, dubious about their inability to sell this limey truck driver to the American people, had expected it to die, and selected an Oklahoma drive-in for the interment, which I think is the sort of opening. All these forebodings had been royally blown away at the stunning premiere we had in London. Ian Fleming, who also had been nervous initially, shook hands with Harry and me afterwards, Harry Saltzman. It was wonderful, he said. We'd proved something else. Americans, far from not accepting British actors in British pictures, loved everything about Bond, and they were ready for more. And I hope you're all ready for more, because that's it for this episode. And thank you once again for joining us. Thank you so much for lending us your ears. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen and support the show. The Bondathon will continue next month with From Russia with Love. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see it. Make sure you don't miss a thing by hitting that subscribe button, and we will see you on the next one.